Okay, yeah, so I will record this, and hopefully it'll create a video that's worth like putting out there on for you guys as a tutorial on YouTube or something, and so I can share it there, and so you can look back and see what we did, and that hopefully will help you. Okay, so to begin, we basically just want to create a new model. I sent out an email just like half an hour ago saying, giving you a link you can use. That link is this page. So if something goes wrong in the version that you're writing and you get lost or something breaks, just take the latest version from this model, from that link, and clone it to start working on your own model again. And that'll bring you back up to speed. And so you can follow along with the class if something goes wrong. So for now, you can just create a new insight and work with that, or you can clone this one and start working from that. What else did I want to say? No, I think I'm good. Okay, so to start, I will just clear this model. And you should notice when you should follow along for one thing and do this for yourself. When you create your new model or whatever, make sure you save it once at the very beginning. Once you've given it a name and saved it, then it will automatically save, or should, whenever you make changes. So then you don't need to worry about losing your stuff, but just make sure you save it that first time. And if you see this button here and it says saved and it's grayed out, that means it's up to date. Okay. So basically, I guess what I want to cover, that what I saw from the feedback, the things that you were looking to learn, mostly it was just kind of a general overview of how to do stuff in general in Insight Maker, and specifically how to look at different scenarios. So how to set something up so that we're covering this scenario, and then maybe we want to make some changes to the model and cover a different scenario. Yeah, like in our last model, we had, well, what if the surface albedo is constant, and then later, what if it actually depended on temperature? And so those could be two different scenarios. And when I was originally thinking about this, I thought, okay, well, maybe we'll use some kind of conditional, some like, under this condition, we do something, and then another condition, we do something else. So that would be something called an if-then-else statement. I think that's actually harder than it needs to be, and I think we can make it easier. Although at this point, it's going to be an introduction of something new, which is going to make it look harder. But this is kind of the plateau, as I was saying to David earlier. This is kind of, I think, where we have to get to with the coding ability in this course. And then we don't have to go any further than this. We just have to understand this kind of stuff, what we're hopefully doing today. And once you have that under your belt, then everything else can just be implementations of what we've learned, but not new stuff on top of that. So with that in mind, let's build a model. And what I would like to build is this model from, I see some E's turning up. Is that you guys? Anybody feeling E-ish, or no, sorry, an A-ish at this point? Anybody need a hand with something? Yeah, you can change the name of your insight. You can go to edit info here, and in here you can change the name. That was here under edit info. So when you're clicking on a primitive, you won't see this box, but if you just click into empty space in the model, then you'll have this option here to click this. Okay, so I think we're good. So what we're going to do is implement this model, which is figure 15 from Meadows, and then we'll see how far we can get into looking at different scenarios. Because in this in the text, the next 5 figures, 16, 17 through 20, are basically different scenarios running this particular model. So we'll see how far we get in implementing some of those, at least one, I hope, and hopefully more. So the first thing that we want to do is basically just sketch out this model. We don't need to get into the details of how everything works. We just need to have all the pieces there and connected to each other in the right way. And this figure 15 shows us exactly how we need to do that. So that makes it easier. We've got this box here, which is stock, the room temperature. So we're going to create that. So let's add a stock, and we'll call it exactly what it says in the figure. So we'll call it room temperature, lowercase, make it look exactly the same as that. Sorry. And you can either do that by clicking on the word itself, or go over here to the name and type it in there. Okay, now we need some flows. So to draw flows, we just grab the arrow that shows up when we hover over the stock, and we can have a flow out, for example. And in Meadows, it's called heat to outside. That didn't work. Let me do it over here. A little detail is that you can move the text around a little bit. Doesn't much matter, but pretty like that. Okay, and we need a flow into this model. So again, I'm going to drag this arrow out, but of course now it's an arrow pointing in the wrong direction. So to fix that, I just use this button here to reverse the direction of the arrow. See how it does that? And again, I want to change the name of that flow, and it's heat from furnace. So you should have something like this. Okay, yep. Yes, I think I always just hit Control Z. I don't know besides that. Is it? Oh yeah, there, edit, undo. Yeah, you can drag that around. All right, now besides those things, we've also got in this model in figure 15, we've got a bunch of variables. The thermostat setting, this discrepancy here, another discrepancy here, and the outside temperature. And these are all variables. So we should add those as primitives. So we should add variable, and let's put them in roughly the same place. And again, we're not adding any code at this point. We'll do that a little bit later. And we want a variable for each one of these things. Oops. And even though it's really long, I'm going to use the exact same name for it. And I'll just resize this little bubble here. And you can keep going, add the rest of them. I think there should be 4 in total. Yeah, I don't know. Try it. Let me know. I really don't know. Yeah, nice. So that will duplicate the variable, like make another copy of it then. Nice. Let me try that. Nice, but I don't want that. Okay, so we've got the basics of the model kind of laid out. This is kind of like having all the pieces to a body, but they're not connected to each other in the right way. So we need to make those connections. Sorry, you just jumped in, right? So if you go to the Connect site and get the link that I just sent, then then you can get like the latest version of this and catch up. Right, okay, so now we need the links. So to create these links, which just says what depends on what. That's all links do. They just say this thing is connected to this thing and maybe depends on that thing. So we go up here, and instead of being on flows transitions, we switch to links, and then we just do the same thing as we were doing before with dragging arrows around. So for example, thermostat setting goes into this discrepancy. So I want to drag from thermostat setting into this discrepancy, and that creates a link between them. And what that says is that now this discrepancy will depend on this thermostat setting. We haven't said how it depends on it yet, but it makes that connection. So go ahead and create all of the links that you see here. All of these thin arrows are links, and you need to make those connections in your model. Yeah.
How should we adjust for the those flows?
Those are flows, yeah. These ones are different, and they do let you connect. So you guys should have something like this when you're ready. Okay, good. Don't forget about your eye clickers. If you want me to speed up or slow down, E is speed up, A is go back, and C and D are kind of I'm good. Okay, so that kind of sets up the structure of the model. And now we want to code in what the model actually does and how it behaves and how it depends on stuff. And the first thing maybe we want to do is create one of our scenarios that they look at in Meadows in the book. For example, in figure 16, they show a specific case. So in figure 16, it shows here what happens if you have a thermostat set at 18 degrees and the room is originally around 10 degrees and all you have is the heat from the furnace. In the text it explains that it says we ignore the losses, the heat to outside entirely in this scenario. Okay, so what we want to do is create that scenario, and we're going to do that with this thing called a button, which is the new thing that you guys haven't seen yet. So to make things a little bit pretty, I'm going to first add a button. So here it is up here. And just so you know, there's a weird thing about buttons. You can't just click on them because to select them, because as soon as you click on them, you activate the button and you make it do whatever it's programmed to do. In this case, it was to create this message on the screen. So instead of just clicking on it, you have to hold down the Shift key and then click on it. Oops. And then you can see that it's got the dots around it, surrounding it. So it's selected, and now I can do stuff with it, like move it around. So let's put it down at the bottom. And I also want to change the name. This is going to be the scenario for figure 16. So let's call the button figure 16. What I envision doing is having more buttons down there, each representing a different scenario. Maybe, just because I like things to be pretty. Let's put all of that in a folder. So that's add primitive, make folder, which will only be available to you. You can only click on it if you already have a primitive selected. So I had the button selected, and then I chose make folder, and then it put that button inside a new folder. And I've picture having more buttons around there, so I'm going to make the folder a little bit bigger, and hopefully I'll be able to have time to create a few more buttons beside it. The folder itself, let's call it scenarios, so it's clear what it does. Okay, So figure 16, let's get into the text a little bit and look at what it does. Okay, this might be a little hard for you to read. It might be too small. So it says if there were nothing else in the system, you start with a cold room with the thermostat set at 18 degrees, then it would behave as shown in figure 16. The furnace comes on, the room warms up, and when the room reaches the thermostat setting, then the furnace turns off. And in this scenario, there's no heat lost to outside. So we want to create code in our button that sets up all of those conditions. We set the thermostat to 18 degrees. We set the room to a starting temperature of 10 degrees. We make sure the heat to outside is turned off, so there's zero heat to outside. And we have to set the code for how the heat from furnace depends on the other things in the model. So I shift click on the button, and then you can see the properties of the button. One of those properties is called the action. And if we click on that and then click the down arrow to expand it, then we can see what that button actually does. And we can change that. So there's going to be a few times where we keep using the same code over and over again. So it'll be handy to kind of remember that, what that code is. One of those things that we're going to use is this: set value, find name, and then stuff and more stuff. And I'll show you how to use that right now. So you say set value, and capitalization is important. So it should start lowercase, and then the V is capitalized. And then we put an opening bracket, and the thing that we want to set the value of is one of these primitives we've created. So we have to find that primitive. And the way to do that is find name, N is capitalized, and then we put in the name that we're looking for. Let's say it's the, not the outside, the room temperature. So we say find name, room temperature, and so it's going to find that primitive, and then we go outside of that bracket, and we set the value of that thing that we just found to, I think it was 10 degrees. So I'll just say 10. So your code should look like this. Punctuation matters, space matters, capitalization matters. You have to be perfect with this. So that kind of sucks, but computers are dumb so far. And in particular, the name of the primitive has to be exactly the same as you wrote it. So if you made a typo when you wrote it, you have to make a typo here too, or change it around. It has to be exactly the same. Okay, so what this does is it sets the room temperature to be 10 degrees, or it should. Let's just try that out. Let's hit apply, and if I simulate this, I should see that the temperature of the room is 10 degrees, and it should just always be 10 degrees because it doesn't. There's nothing to make a change. Wow. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I haven't actually hit my button yet. Like I didn't actually run the code to make it do that. So I have to like actually press that button. And now I've just made it happen. So now if I hit simulate, yeah, there's something up here. That is the room temperature, and it's 10 degrees. So you get how that works? If anything's gone wrong at this point, you can clone this model because you know it's working at this point. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff. Oh, so there's the outside temperature. Let's just configure our display here and get rid of things that we don't want. We don't want this discrepancy, so I'm going to kill that. So it won't display, the chart won't display this. I don't want this discrepancy either, so I'll kill that. So now I just have 3 temperatures inside my graph: the room temperature, the thermostat setting, and the outside temperature. I'm going to turn off add newly created primitives, though it doesn't really matter. I'm going to add a legend. Let's put it on top so we can see what's going on. And maybe for completeness, I'll add a label to my y-axis. Yeah. So to make the button run, you click on it, but you make sure it's not selected at the time when you're clicking on it. So click somewhere else, for example, and then click on it. Did that help? All right. If you want to catch up at any time, you can just clone my model. Yeah. Scroll up here. Yeah. So these are the things. Yeah. Clone mine, because trying to debug that will take too much time. Yeah. It runs instantly and then it stops. Like it doesn't continue running or anything. So it's just a one-off kind of thing. Okay, so now we've got temperature here. We've got time here, time in years. We should change this. So this is in the model settings. So I'm going to close the simulation window and go to settings. So in figure 16 here, we go from 0 to 8 hours. So let's make it the same for our simulation. Simulation length of 8, and the units is hours. Let's reduce our time step, maybe 0.1 hours, and I always like to make it accurate. Doesn't matter too much. Yeah. Yeah. So it's It's a very small thing here. This is something that people build careers on, figuring out what this time step is, what it means, and how it should be used. There are like theses written on this little box right there, that time step. It's a huge thing. So I won't get into that too much. It's just when the model runs, it basically increments forward in little jumps of time. And so it goes from time 0 to the next time point and figures out what's changed in between there, and then it keeps going forward and forward. If you have too big of a time step, it's kind of like it makes mistakes. And so having a smaller time step will make it more accurate. The accurate version does a little bit of sneaky stuff to approximate having an even smaller time step without having to do that. You would only, I would say you would only use the fast if your simulation is just running really slow, but that's probably not going to be an issue for us. So yeah, if you're curious, this RK4 is called Runge-Kutta numerical approximation technique, and there are books written about it, but let's not read those. Okay, so once we've got that, I will just simulate this again. We should see the same kind of thing. Yeah, it looks good. You'll notice that it looks like it's running slow. It's not actually. It's already done all the calculations, and it's just showing it to us slowly. We can increase the speed just by changing this select thing. Let's say we go to 5 times normal, then it's 5 times faster. Okay, so we've only added like one little thing to our button so far. We need to add a few more things to make it actually work the way it does in figure 16. So let's shift select our button, go to the action, click the down arrow to bring up the editor, and start figuring out what else we need to put in. There's a couple things that maybe I'll just put in at the end that I'll show you about now. Close all windows is a nice command to always have. So that's close, capital A, all, capital W, windows. And that's a command that just says like, okay, whatever I had showing, whatever simulation results I had up already, just close them all so I can start fresh. And after I do that, let's throw in run model. Again, the M is capitalized. And basically what this will do is we'll be able to set a bunch of values at the beginning, and then we'll close all the windows that the user has been playing with and run the model showing a new simulation result. And we do that all from that button. Yeah, I don't have to leave space. This is just to point out that I'm going to put more stuff in. Yeah, it goes from top to bottom. So it'll do the first thing first and then next thing. And then once it gets down to the bottom, then it just stops. So let's just see how that works. I'll apply that. You'll notice I can't click on the button right now because it's selected. But if I just click somewhere else, then it's not selected anymore. And when I hit the button, then it runs the model with those commands that I set up in there. So if we had multiple buttons side by side, we could quickly do different scenarios, one for each button. Yeah. So imagine in one scenario you want the outside temperature to be 10 degrees, and another scenario you want it to be something else. Then setting it in the button lets you do that. Yeah.
Just to open up the button.
Shift, click on the button, and then wait, you guys work on it. Okay, so let's continue adding commands to our button. So again, shift and then click on the button. And then we go up to action and bring up the editor. And we're going to set some more values. Set value, find name, and we have to choose the name now. One important thing is we don't want any heat to outside. So no heat losses in this scenario. So you should have code that looks like this. Make sure you put the closing quotes and the bracket. Make sure you have a comma there, quotes around these things again, and a semicolon at the end. And as a rule, the best thing you can do, you'll probably forget to do this, and at some point it'll screw you over. The best thing to do is every time you add a new line here and you think you know what it's supposed to do, hit apply and then press the button and make sure it does what it's supposed to do. So no surprises so far, and that's good. You might get like an error message, then you know something went wrong in the very last thing that you did since the last time you ran the simulation. And so that's a good way to figure out quickly where your error is, and then you can look carefully at the thing you changed and make sure you get it right. Okay, again, shift click, action, editor, and I'm going to add another set value. We want the thermostat to be at 18 degrees in this scenario. So if we were being good, we would hit apply and then hit the button, make sure it works. I'm feeling cocky, so let's just keep going. Let's do at least one more line. Okay, so the next line, what else do we need? We need the heat from the furnace should depend on the discrepancy between the temperatures. I just remember what these things are called. So you might need to like go back to each of the primitives and copy its name or something and make sure you've got it exactly right. And I'm just going to leave this blank for the moment, and then I'll hit apply. And the reason I want to leave it blank is because I want to put this variable name in it so that the heat from the furnace is exactly equal to this discrepancy, but that's a really long thing to type in. So I'm going to just click on the name there and then Control-C, copy, or maybe right-click, copy. And now I can go back to my button and go to the action again. And up here is where I want to put that thing. The only trick to this is it should not just be the name itself. It should be enclosed in square brackets. Whenever you want to use a value from something else, you put it in square brackets. So this is saying, find the thing that's called heat from furnace and set its value to be whatever the value of this other discrepancy thing is. So they'll be equal to each other. And that will make the rate of heat flow into the room be equal to this discrepancy. Yeah. Yeah, you could throw in a converter. Totally. Yeah. Because it's a one-to-one, it's just a straight line relationship. Yeah. Okay, so let me show you why. Okay, well, I'll just leave it like that for a second. But let's click on the heat from furnace, and right now the flow rate is equal to 0. Let's edit that. So we click on the down arrow to bring up the editor, and what we want it to be is this discrepancy. So if I just said set it equal to this thing, it does that. It puts square brackets around it, and so we're just copying that format so that what the button does is it sets that text to be exactly the same thing with the square brackets and all. So instead of changing it by hand to be that value, we're telling the button to change it to be that value. That's all. And that's, again, that's what lets us create scenarios here, because the next button could set it to be something else. Okay, so there's still one thing that I think we're missing here, which is we haven't set this variable to be anything. It's just 0 right now. So we need our button to actually be the right thing. Maybe what we could do is just change it by hand and then throw that result into our button. So I'm editing this variable called discrepancy between desired and actual room temperature. And what I want it to be is the thermostat setting and then minus the room temperature. And now we can see that this is the value that we want it to be. So I'm going to copy that and put it into the button instead of having it here. So I won't even save this. I'll just put cancel. And let's go back to the button and we'll set value, find name. This is a complicated name. I'll get back to that. And then I'll paste in what I had. Don't forget your closing semicolon. And for the find name, well, we already have it here. So we can just copy that without the square brackets. We're just looking for the name of this variable. So in this scenario, we've set the room temperature to start at 10 degrees. We've set the heat outside to be 0, so there's no heat losses. The thermostat setting is 18 degrees. The heat from the furnace is equal to the difference in temperature between the thermostat and the actual room temperature. So the colder the room, the more heat flow into the room. And the discrepancy, which we had to code, is the difference in those two temperatures, the thermostat minus the room temperature. And that's what goes into the heat from furnace flow. So I think that's all the elements that are in figure 16. So we should be able to run it and see what happens. Oh, don't click simulate. Press the button. That looks good to me. Okay, so we only got through one button, but we could just code any number of buttons. We can copy and paste the code for that button and then change what's inside the set value thing to be whatever we want. So then we could create all sorts of different scenarios, and we could reproduce all of figures 17 to 20 in this way, and each one could be a button. Yeah.
So like both buttons horizontal, and how do we incorporate that button into?
That's a really good point. Okay, so let's quickly. We're going to run into our class time really soon, but I want to try and do this. So let's give it a try. So I'm going to close this window and let's set up storytelling mode. So it's in the menu under storytelling. Something looks weird here. There we go. Okay, so I'll enable that, and let's add a group. Let's call it figure 16. Okay, and then in this figure, I want to run action, and this is how we tell it to actually press a button. We say press button. Oh, sorry, a little bit of a mistake there. The only trick is, again, we have to find the name of the button. Find the button with that name. So the name of the button is figure 16, and that's all we need to do. Just put a semicolon on the end and you're done. And we might, after that, add a message or something. Say, you just pressed button figure 16. Whatever you want to put in there to explain what's going on. So again, the code for that was press button and then find name and the name of the thing that you're looking for. Yeah, it does. Yeah, we already put that in there. So it's good. It's automatic. It should automatically do that when we press the button. So I just hit apply, and now if we hit view story, you see that right away, it presses that button and it runs the simulation. And it shows us at the bottom the message that we had. So there you go. Okay, we got to stop there. So let's run into our classroom and start our class.